What began as opening statements quickly became a shouting match. I'm Ethan Blake, and I'll walk you through this glorious train wreck where policy lost to political performance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. And I'll start with three substantial notes of agreement. One, we do face an incredibly complex threat environment. We face Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, various other terrorist organizations working together against American interests in a way we have never seen before, and with an economy like China's that we've never seen before. It's going to be very difficult to meet those challenges. Second, innovation is incredibly important and crucial to that. The changes in warfare are happening at a more rapid pace than I think we've ever seen before. We have to innovate more quickly, and I appreciate your leadership on getting after acquisition reform. Because what's absolutely true is the Pentagon is not ready for this right now. And certainly that predates this Secretary of Defense and this administration. It's a problem that we need to get after, to do the acquisition reform so that we can get the materials that we need quickly, innovate more quickly. We've got a lot of good ideas in this committee. Look forward to working with the administration on trying to get that done. Second, the budget is a major problem. It is simply unacceptable that we are this late in the year and we do not have a budget. That's the basics of how you plan to do all of that. And this is but the culmination of a series of problems. We had a CR for FY25, largely at the insistence of President Trump. And then, by the time we did pass a budget, it was just a CR. And now we're on a path again towards a CR in FY26. There is no budget transparency and no plan that we can see. And what we have seen happening at the Pentagon in the interim is also very disturbing and without explanation. There's been talk about 8% cuts across the board. Nobody on this committee knows what that means. Some of it is happening. It has not been made transparent to us. Is it going to make us better? Is it part of a larger strategy? Nobody really knows. We also heard the plan to cut 20% of the flag officers. Again, no strategy, no plan. This is why the budget is so important. The budget can inform all of this. Maybe that's a good idea, but we have no idea because there is no transparency and no follow-through. Also, quite disturbingly, within the Department of Defense and also across the federal government, the one and only criteria that is consistent is loyalty to Trump, as opposed to loyalty to the law or loyalty to the Constitution. This started with one of the more shameful events in DoD history, and that's when we pulled security details from former members of the Pentagon who faced security threats. Why were those security details pulled? They weren't pulled because anything told us that they were safe. Chairman Milley is one great example. He was on the threat list because he carried out an order from President Trump, and rightfully so, to kill Soleimani in the Middle East. He's now on Iran's hit list, and we pulled his security detail, leaving him and his family vulnerable. Why? Because he had the audacity to say something critical of President Trump. I mean, that's just embarrassing. If you told me 10 years ago on this committee that something like that would have happened, I wouldn't have believed you. And now we have a dictate from the White House saying that all federal employees will be tested for whether or not they are supportive of President Trump. The New York Times had a great headline on that saying, why does an air traffic controller have to be a Trump supporter? Well, I would ask, why does an acquisition professional have to be a Trump supporter? If you're focused on loyalty, you're not focused on competency, you're not focused on ability, and it is the wrong way to go. Even within the budget, we see the influence of the president over the influence of common sense. We've all heard about the Golden Dome. When I first heard about the Golden Dome, it was interesting because it reminded me of a joke I first told about 12 years ago when we were dealing with a large number of Pentagon programs that were more ambitious than practical. Future combat systems, the expeditionary fighting vehicle. You know, basically they said, well, this is what we want. And we had this joke that, well, all I want is sharks with freaking laser beams attached to them. That became the armed services thing. I actually have a little plastic shark that my staff made for me with a laser beam attached to it. Making the perfect the enemy of the good is a problem. And nobody on this committee knows what Golden Dome is. And the other thing that's really important about this, contained within that is one of the most important national security threats that we face. Missile defense and counter-drone. We have a lot of programs that people are working on in that direction. What happens to those programs when we take $25 billion towards a project that no one can explain and no one can understand? And again, we don't have a budget, so we're taking it on faith. That is deeply troubling. Equally troubling is the Air Force One airplane that we got from Qatar. There's all kinds of ethics problems with that, which I'll leave aside for the moment. But that airplane is going to have to be fitted to be Air Force One. It's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Again, no transparency. We're not told what that's going to cost or where it's going to go. But because President Trump wanted it, he gets it. Hundreds of $1 million goes out the window. We don't have the capacity to sort of say, sorry, sir, that's not a good idea. And the last one on this list is one that, frankly, I had a hard time believing when I first heard it. Apparently, the president has decided that the F-35 would be a better plane if it had 2 engines. And to a certain degree, it's hard to argue with. I guess 2 engines is better than 1, except that you can't just add a second engine to the F-35. This is a program that's taken us over 25 years, and we are, knock on wood, finally to the point where we're going to have the plane. I would have thought this would have been dismissed, but I hear defense contractors, Pentagon, they're looking at this idea. It is okay to tell the boss that he's wrong. We all have dumb ideas. It's good to have people around us who have the capability and the competency to say, no, we're not going to do that. We're walking down the wrong direction. In terms of the global strategy, I substantially agree with the chairman, except that I fear that America first does mean America alone. We've seen that in a number of different issues, certainly placing tariffs on absolutely every country in the world, irrespective of our relationships. Well, sorry, except for Russia. Didn't place tariffs on Russia. That alienates people. Cutting off foreign aid programs, which I realize is not the purview of the Department of Defense, but I remind you of something that Secretary Gates said before this committee. If you're going to cut off the State Department, you better give me more ammunition. The two things are related. We stopped programs that were feeding hungry children in Africa. Literally took food out of the mouths of hungry children. Why? Apparently because there were a couple of USAID programs that supported LGBTQ programs. Now, why we didn't just cut those instead of cutting the ones that were feeding hungry children in Africa, I don't know, but that really sends the wrong message to the rest of the world. And the last one, and once we get to the Q&As, I would be curious to hear what the Secretary has to say about this. Threatening to use military force to invade Greenland and Panama. I don't believe the President has actually threatened military force against Canada just yet. He's just threatened to annex it. So Denmark, Canada, Panama, 3 peaceful nations that we are allies with, or were anyway. The message that sends to the rest of the world is one that the U.S. is purely in it for itself and does not care about the rest of the world. And this has implications. We're trying to stop China. We are in a global competition with China. We have built up excellent partnerships across Asia over the course of the last 6 or 7 years. In Australia, in Japan, in India, in the Philippines. Largely, that was because China exercised economic coercion. They went ballistic on Australia for daring to suggest that China could be more transparent about COVID, and Australia recalculated. Now we are the ones using economic coercion on our partners and allies and pushing them away. And this filters back over to Ukraine, where I am in violent agreement with the chairman about how important Ukraine is to our national security interests. And I also agree with the secretary. We need to get peace in Ukraine. The longer that war continues, the more dangerous it is for everybody. The administration made a crucial mistake at the start by showing weakness to Vladimir Putin and fundamentally misunderstood the war. Actually put out quotes that bought into the notion that Ukraine was somehow responsible for the war, even though Russia was the one who invaded. And Putin saw that signal. He saw that big green light and knew if he just waited a little while, we would abandon our allies, we would abandon our partners, and we would abandon Ukraine. The president promised to end the war in Ukraine on day one. Now, admittedly, that was a moronic thing to say, and he wasn't ever going to do it. But well over 100 days in, the war is going stronger than ever. Putin is attacking more aggressively than he ever has, because President Trump sent him the message. We're walking away. It's all yours. We need to change that message. Ukraine can defend itself and we can get to peace, but not if we don't make it clear that we're going to keep the 53-nation alliance together and that we're actually going to defend Ukraine going forward. The other part of this that is deeply disturbing is apparently if policy isn't going well, the solution to it is to just act like it is. In the Middle East, you hear the president, peace through strength is back, everything's fine, we're all doing well. But just like in Ukraine, when the president took office, there was a ceasefire in Gaza. Now that war is going stronger than ever. The humanitarian crisis is growing. Israel is continuing to attack in Lebanon and Syria. Yemen is still a problem. Yes, for the moment, they have stopped attacking U.S. ships, but President Biden went through that as well. Attacked Yemen from time to time. They stood down and they stood back up. And now we are dangerously close to that conflict spreading to Iran. Do not misunderstand me. I do not blame President Trump for that, all right? But to stand up and say it's all solved because I'm president and to not be engaged and figure out how to solve it, just to imagine that you can create the factual world that you want just with your words, is an incredibly, incredibly dangerous thing. The last issue that I want to talk about is the issue around DEI, because I am deeply disturbed about what the Pentagon is doing in this direction. And keep in mind, I say that as someone, I didn't love the excesses of the DEI programs that put in place. I live with them out in the Seattle-King County area. I think there were a lot of mistakes behind that. But instead of addressing that in a sensible way, we've decided to go at it with a right-wing cultural war, with a sort of right-wing cultural revolution that frankly would make Chairman Mao proud. We are banning books, we are pulling images down off of the website, leading to some just sort of ridiculous things. There was, of course, the instance when all reference to the Enola Gay disappeared for a few days. Now that's kind of funny because in that context, gay means something different. But why do we care if the word gay that means homosexual is printed somewhere? Why is that threatening to us? Why are we spending time on that instead of, I don't know, giving us a budget that might have been more productive? And then we're pulling books off the shelves, which led to one really amusing outcome where someone said in one particular library within the Pentagon, you could not find a copy of Jackie Robinson's biography. That had been pulled. But you could find 2 copies of Mein Kampf. So it's interesting, I guess, well, got to have 2 because if one's checked out, somebody needs something to do. Why are we doing that? And now we've got the changes to names. And this changing the names of ships, going back to the original names of the Confederacy for all of our military bases, a lot of different things can be said about this, but I just want to close by drawing one particular contrast, and that's about Medgar Evers, who's actually a personal hero of mine. I read his wife's book when I was a freshman in college, and it inspired me. My son's middle name is Evers. We are talking about pulling Medgar Evers' name off of a ship. Now, this is a man who served in the military, but also he stood up to Jim Crow, white supremacy, and racism in the South. And I know we're focused on the warrior ethos. If you don't think that it took a warrior ethos to do that in Mississippi in the 1950s and the 1960s, then you're just not paying attention. Why are we having this conversation? And Mr. Secretary, your summary of the problem, where you said that basically the problem with DEI is there just aren't enough trannies from Brooklyn or lesbians from San Francisco who want to join the 82nd Airborne. Not only do the trannies and lesbians not join, but those very same ads turn off the young, patriotic Christian men who have traditionally filled our ranks. We can go after the extremes of DEI without denigrating and insulting people, and by the way, leaving out the Jews, apparently, why we're putting that group in there. Because the thing is, the insulting, belittling language aside, you're right. There aren't enough trannies in Brooklyn or lesbians in San Francisco to fill the military. There also aren't enough, what's the word here, young, patriotic Christian men who remind us of John Wayne to fill the military either. We are a diverse nation. We need to be inclusive. And we need to not actively insult people who don't happen to fit our preconceived notion of what a member of the military should look like. So we're at a situation now where the military is denigrating Medgar Evers, who died standing up for the values that I think are central to our country. One of the things I love about the military is service above self. I mean, it's such an important message that everyone who serves says that. No one I can think of personifies that more than Medgar Evers. Instead, we're going to go back to renaming the bases after the Confederates. Now, I know, apparently you spend a lot of time finding other names that applied to people who actually did serve this country honorably. But President Trump, just yesterday, 2 days ago now, down at Fort Bragg, when he blatantly politicized the United States military, sort of, as they like to say, said the quiet part out loud, that those bases are being renamed for the Confederates. So we honor white supremacist, slave-owning insurrectionists who lost, by the way, they're losers, instead of Medgar Evers. Can we please just stop and get back to the business of treating everybody equally and with respect? A fear of a left-wing cultural revolution is not solved by launching a right-wing cultural revolution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Prepare to witness the implosion of the Democrat Party's national security platform in real time. What you're about to see is a masterclass in projection, hypocrisy, and abject weakness disguised as intellectual superiority. This isn't just a congressional statement, it's a surrender document. This is Congressman Adam Smith, a man who has presided over the decay of our military readiness for years, now attempting to lecture patriots on strength, strategy, and loyalty. It is a spectacle so profoundly out of touch with reality, it's almost a parody. But the threat it represents is all too real. He begins with a disingenuous attempt at agreement. He acknowledges the threats from China, Russia, and Iran. Wonderful. A first grader could tell you that. But then, in the same breath, he immediately pivots to attacking the very man who has the courage to confront these threats head on, President Donald J. Trump. My first reaction is just a mix of frustration and pity. Can these people go 5 minutes without their Trump derangement syndrome flaring up? He whines about not having a budget, blaming President Trump for a continuing resolution, CR, as if Congress, which he is a part of, has no role in the process. The sheer lack of self-awareness is staggering. He complains about a lack of transparency and a lack of a plan, but what was his plan when he was chairman? To hollow out the military with woke DEI initiatives and endless, feckless foreign entanglements? Then comes the core of his meltdown, the moment his true colors bleed through. He laments that the one and only criteria that is consistent is loyalty to Trump. My God, the horror. He says this as if it's a bad thing. Loyalty to a duly elected president who is putting America first is a problem for him. He prefers loyalty to the Constitution, he says, but what he really means is loyalty to the unelected bureaucracy, the deep state swamp that President Trump was elected to drain. The very swamp that Adam Smith has comfortably inhabited for decades. His example? Pulling security details from former officials. He clutches his pearls over Chairman Milley losing his security, conveniently framing it as punishment for criticizing Trump. The truth, which he deliberately omits, is that these details are astronomically expensive and are not lifetime entitlements. But his real grievance is that Milley, a man who engaged in what many believe were borderline treasonous back-channel calls to China, is no longer being shielded by the taxpayer. My heart swells with pride for a president who dares to hold the permanent political class accountable. Smith finds this embarrassing. What's embarrassing, Congressman, is a general who is more worried about our enemies' feelings than our national security. And the line about an air traffic controller needing to be a Trump supporter, it's a classic straw man. No one is saying that. What we are saying, and what every patriot knows in their bones, is that we need people in government who love this country. We need people who believe in the America First agenda, not saboteurs who will work from within to undermine the will of the American people. He calls this a focus on loyalty over competency. I call it ensuring the people executing the mission actually believe in the mission. It's patriotism, not a political litmus test. He then mocks ideas like the Golden Dome missile defense and improving the F-35, painting them as the whimsical, idiotic fantasies of the president. He sneers, "It is okay to tell the boss that he's wrong." It's dripping with condescension. This is the voice of the establishment, the experts who gave us 20 years in Afghanistan, who believe they know better than the elected commander-in-chief. The arrogance is infuriating. President Trump has consistently challenged outdated ideas within the military-industrial complex, offering bold solutions and a forward-thinking agenda. For that, some establishment figures like Adam Smith have responded with mockery, perhaps because innovation outside their control makes them uncomfortable. The contradictions in Smith's arguments become most evident when he addresses foreign policy. He warns that America First could lead to isolation, but then criticizes tariffs meant to protect American workers from unfair international trade practices. He expresses concern over cuts to foreign aid programs, even when some of those programs supported questionable initiatives overseas or benefited corrupt regimes. His emotional claim that such changes took food out of the mouths of hungry children lacks nuance and overlooks the core goal of prioritizing American citizens and ensuring aid is aligned with national interests. Regarding DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, his reasoning appears inconsistent. He acknowledges some problems with implementation, but quickly shifts to criticize conservatives for pushing back against certain cultural policies. He references disputed claims about book bans, like a situation involving Mein Kampf and a Jackie Robinson biography, which have been challenged by fact checkers and used to unfairly portray opponents. These narratives often cloud genuine concerns about bias and divisiveness. Smith also defends the naming of military ships like the USNS Medgar Evers, while opposing efforts to rename bases in a way that some believe honors regional history. His dismissal of these historical figures as white supremacist insurrectionists and labeling them losers reflects a deep polarization rather than constructive dialogue. The broader discussion deserves more balance and respect for differing viewpoints rooted in American heritage. The disrespect is breathtaking. He is defending a politicized military and attacking a return to tradition and a focus on warfighting. He saves his most insulting comments for last, mocking the idea that our military is filled by young, patriotic Christian men. He sneers at them, belittles their faith and patriotism, and then claims we need to be more inclusive by catering to every leftist identity group. He fundamentally misunderstands the warrior ethos. He sees the military not as a lethal fighting force to defend the nation, but as a social experiment to advance his woke ideology. It is a dangerous, disqualifying worldview. This entire speech is a monument to the failed establishment thinking that brought our nation to the brink. It is the death rattle of a political class that has been rejected by the American people. Thank God we have a president who is ignoring these clowns and is focused on rebuilding our military's strength, honor, and singular focus, winning America's wars.